Great rewards don't wait, so why should you? Through the InVigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all of your InVigor hybrid canola by November 14th. Talk to your retailer. Terms and conditions apply.
I'm Sean Haney, and this is Real Ag on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. Real Ag on the Weekend starts now.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome here, of course, to Real Ag on the Weekend. I am Lyndsey Smith, and yes, I am your host once again for the show. Your regular host, Sean Haney, will be back next weekend or the weekend after. It all depends. We share the load here at Real Agriculture. Wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much for joining me here. We've got a great show lined up. You're going to hear from agronomist Doug Moisey on fertility planning, on nutrient planning for 2026 with, of course, those thin margins, those high input costs in mind. It's definitely top of mind for a lot of producers, and for good reason, of course. We'll also hear from Bruce Holmquist, and he's got some thoughts on collaboration and cooperation within the cattle industry, which is pretty cool. We'll round out the show with Keith Currie and Ron Lemaire. They are fresh off a trip from Mexico, where they met with their Mexican counterparts, with the federal ag minister as well, to talk about how Canada and Mexico could work closer together on several different agriculture and agri-food segments. So stick around for that. You'll also hear from Clint Jurke on InVigor Canola, and that's our product spotlight that'll be in our third segment of the day. So without further ado, let's hop to it. Here's my conversation with Doug Moisey and fertility planning for 2026. Doug, how are you?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. How goes Alberta today?
Cooler temperatures. We still have the odd guy still harvesting out there. We've got some very dry soil conditions. I know people are out there. Some are doing some soil sampling, some are not. But just a lot of little things going on. Guys are trying to wrap up and trying to plan for next year.
Yeah. Now, that does bring us to, of course, our conversation today. Doug, in talking to the farmers today, more than one of them have mentioned fertilizer prices as a concern. Fall is a great time to soil test, of course. How do we put all this together as far as the soil testing question and the fertility question?
Well, I think to start off with is that the soil testing question, I think more than anything, is going to be imperative this year. And it's because of the variable yields we've been hearing about. Some guys actually were quite surprised at their yields. They never thought they were going to hit over 40, and they averaged in the 50s. So the question will be is that how far did the root system go down? How much did they mine out of their soil? And how much is going to be left over? And that reason being is that with the fertilizer prices today that are going on, there's a lot of discussion on, number one, when to apply, what to apply, and at what rates. And so some of the questions I've been fielding from some of our customers and even some of our seed reps within the Pioneer chain is, should we be putting fertilizer on now? And yeah, we've had some cooler weather these last few days, but soil temperatures are generally warm, but it is dry. And my fear is that if we're going to be putting some fertilizer down right now, is it going to be there next spring? Because if we get some timely rain or snow here in the next week where it drags that, especially nitrogen and sulfur, if you're dry down to 10, 12 inches, it could drag it down that far, and will that root system get a hold of it? And so there's that question going on. And then probably the bigger question is I'm thinking because of high fertilizer prices, where do I cut back? And one of the things that I get concerned about is that the four major nutrients, nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, and sulfur, to me, those are your essential building blocks. And if you're going to cut back one, it could affect the others. And so I get worried is that if I'm going to cut back, am I setting myself up for a potential yield loss for next spring, especially if we get some much needed moisture over the winter?
And, it is, of course, that major question of, if you're trying to keep costs in check, I'm not saying necessarily, majorly pull back, but keep in check, is there a particular nutrient where maybe you can ride things out a little bit? Is where maybe you can pull back?
Well, one opportunity could be, and again, depending upon how your soil tests are being done and how deep you're sampling, but one potentially is potash or potassium. We have seen in some areas where guys have already actually limited themselves over the last couple of years, and they're starting to see that their levels are depleting. But the one thing that we see is that because phosphate and potassium are not very mobile, my suspicion would be, and I'm not a soils expert, but my suspicion would be a lot of that potash is in the top couple inches just because of our conservation tillage and the way we're returning back nutrients back to the soil through our straw. But again, those two nutrients are not very mobile, whereas nitrogen and sulfur is. So, if you've got a good soil sampling program where you're doing grid sampling, you're looking at your zones of high yield versus poor yield, what their levels are, and maybe there is that opportunity to cut back on that. The one thing I wouldn't be cutting back is nitrogen and sulfur, because those are the essential nutrients. And when it comes to canola production, it's one of your major carryouts next fall. So, again, you have to be very careful now. Some guys have talked to me about potentially top dressing if they get the rains and prices, settle out. Well, that's fine, but you still have some critical times that you have to get it on in the springtime. But it's also those times where if you're going to do it in crop, you've got to get in at a certain time, like prior to 6 leaves, especially for sulfur. But you also need the moisture to get it in there. So the thing to think about is, for example, is that it's roughly about 2.5 to 3 pounds of nitrogen for every bushel. So if you cut back 10 pounds of nitrogen, you are basically cutting back 3 to 4 bushels an acre potential. $12 economics right now, maybe it pencils out. It's good to save it, but if the prices go up, we could be dealing with the fact that you're losing, let's go $35 an acre, $40 an acre because of that one simple cutback. So that's why we have to be very cognizant of what we're doing. And that's where sitting down with your local agronomist or your local fertility specialist and really getting a fertilizer program dedicated to maximize yields for next year. And, maybe it's holding off and looking at springtime applications to make sure it's all there. There's different ways of managing this problem.
Although you do bring up a really good point on the top dressing side, if we're talking canola, it is one that, if you're going to try that, it's very early. It's much earlier in the season than I think most people realize.
Oh, for sure. And, and then you still got to go with the risk is that, conditions are good. You got good moisture down below, but then you're not getting rain for the next 2 weeks. And you broadcast that product out there. It is not getting into the root zone and into solution in any reasonable time. It still takes some days to get in there. So top dressing can pay in good rain seasons, but if it's raining and then it dries up, you could be sitting there with fertilizer up top. But you also got to think about, too, is that especially if it's something like urea, the volatilization losses to the atmosphere could be 10% a day. Yeah. There's things to look at, and I think that's where it's going to pay to sit down and start looking at it case by case, and maybe it's field by field, is that this field's going to only get this much and that field's going to get that much. And my suggestion is that fertilize those high-yielding fields. Don't cut back, because that's going to be where you potentially make your bread and butter for next year.
Pick your winners. Farmers know which fields are always the best field.
For sure. They always know which fields yield the best, and those are the ones that I worry about cutting back on, because you may be cutting back on your yields. So for me, that's very critical in my mind, especially going forward into next year. The other thing I would just say, though, too, is that for me is that, again, it's all about economics, I understand, but you have to figure out what is the return on investment for anything that you're going to be doing here this fall. It's going to be even tighter to think about that one.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to leave it there for right now. We're going to take a quick break, and I'll be back with more of RealAg on the weekend right after this.
AgriTrade Equipment Expo, November 5th to 7th at Westerner Park in Red Deer. Discover the latest ag innovations, equipment, and technology. Get your tickets now at agra-trade.com.
If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters, and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
Hi,
I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Mazik Seeds and Lalamon Plant Care.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and joining me now, it's Bruce Holmquist out of Canistino, Saskatchewan. How are you doing, Bruce? How are the calves?
The calves good. Yeah, I mean, the cattle market's good. We dodged a bit of a bullet, I think, with President Trump's excitement that he created late last week. The markets, the board went down. Futures went down the limit, and yet the live prices stayed steady, and we haven't really seen a dip in that. And for most of the cow-calf guys, that's the most important thing, right?
That's right, yeah.
They're selling their cows now, and yeah, it's a great time to be in the cow business, and everybody's kind of a little bit nervous. We don't need government interference and policies wrecking anything, and we got a sniff of that last week from the Americans.
I know, when it comes to markets, any major government involvement always makes me just a little nervous, so I could see that one for sure. How did the grass go this year for your area? Did you have decent moisture?
No, we didn't until later on. We had a really slow start until the beginning of June, so that kind of set our hay crop into what it was, which turned out a little better than we thought. But we have some, pretty new hay stands, so that helps that out. Pasture, yeah, it got extended. We've had some late rains and moisture. We had 10 days ago or so, we had 2 inches of water out of a bunch of wet snow and everything else, so that was pretty welcome, but there's no extra water laying around. I mean, it's just all soaked right in.
I did see pictures of that snowfall. It feels a little early, Bruce, I'll be honest. I was not keen.
Yeah, my birthday is the 15th of October, and I remember 4 or 5 times that it snowed and stayed. And that makes for a pretty darn long winter.
It really does. Now, Bruce, I wanted to touch on, you mentioned the cattle. Everybody knows Simmental guy, and in fact, in an official capacity, and yet there was an announcement that maybe there was a retirement happening. What's that story?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Lyndsey. I've been with the organization for 25 years now, through being a director, then a staff person, then into senior management. My current contract is up the end of March. I will not be renewing it, so the hunt's on for a CEO replacement, and the board's actively engaged in that. And I'm going to help whomever they hire, she or he, into the role between whenever the hire is and that end of March date.
Okay. So does that mean more cows in your future with all this extra time?
My kids have cows. And they have some of my cows, all 3 of them. And with that, I'm not maxed out, but I don't have a lot right here. I just live on an acreage. Yeah, there's ways around it. But I think I might just take a breath and see what opportunities are there. I've been contacted by a few companies outside of the breed association lens, and they're interesting, but I'm not going to jump into anything. But I'm not retiring. I got to have something to wake up to. and too young for too much leisure. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say, but you are far too young to be retiring. So you just need to switch gears. Try something else.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Different horizon, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Now, of course, there is a question of the week, as there always is, and I have a feeling you might have some interesting thoughts on this one, especially with the different roles that you have held. But my question this week is about collaboration and cooperation between either, other businesses or other ranchers or farmers, and of course, in your role with the Simmental Association, et cetera. What are some of the collaborations and cooperations that you have valued in your career?
Well, I think from a seed stock perspective, I don't call it a purebred perspective because seed stock is where it's at. Not everything's a purebred that goes out and breeds a cow. So with that, we've had the Canadian Beef Breeds Council has been an umbrella organization that has had real strength at times, and then has had to work harder at it at times. But they've always been a voice to government, and that's been something important, so that we are united on a lot of things. Through that, the Canadian Beef Improvement Network is another collaborative effort that has been a while in the making, but it's moving forward, and it's going to hopefully tie the things that you just mentioned together, the seed stock, breed associations, backers, feedlot, whatever, just get that data collected and trace it back to the genetics so we can make better cattle, but maybe more importantly, just eliminate the bottom 30%. Okay, we all know that there's some really inefficient cattle out there, and just because they're bringing their calves walk across the scale and push it down hard, doesn't mean that that's all profit when you consider the feed of the cow. So those are the kind of things that we need to better define and look into, because all you have to do is walk through a supermarket and look at the meat cases and compare the cost of chicken, poultry, and beef, and we're a pretty high-priced product. I'm not saying we need any kind of price controls on it. The market will do that, and right now demand is as high as it's ever been, but we need to get more efficient. That's what I hope comes out of it. I don't know if I'll see it. It's been talked about for so long, but we need the leadership in the industry to move it forward.
I really appreciate the comment about seed stock versus purebreds, and it is a bit of a mind shift, right? And if you could talk to the sheep industry, that'd be great. Anyway, we'll maybe sort that one out offline. How's that sound?
Yeah.
And I really appreciate as well, on the crop side, we often talk about, high yields, but what does each bushel cost you past a certain point? Doesn't necessarily add to profit. And cattle, you're right, no different. You can grow a lot of pounds of beef, but what did it cost you to get there? That's really the important part.
Well, exactly. I mean, when you look at our area here and the yields that did materialize, they were incredible for the little amount of rain we had. 75 plus wheat and barley all over 100 and 50 bushel canola, and some people were disappointed with that, but I think if you told them the 1st of July that's what they'd get, they'd be pretty excited. 140 bushel oats for a lot of people. But it's that nutrient cost, right? And that's what's changed so much from my grain farming days. Everything's fertilized, sprayed, and done to the max and to perfection. But then you got a pretty big bill at the end. So you need to have that those yields to even come close to making it work.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Bruce, looking forward to hearing what exciting challenges are ahead for you post the Simmental Association.
Sounds good. Anytime, Lyndsey. Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break here on RealAg on the Weekend, and I'll be back with more right after this.
Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at xitebio.ca.
RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hepner and Lyndsey Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BASF Canada.
The following is a paid sponsorship by BASF. Welcome back to RealAg on the Weekend. I'm Lyndsey Smith with Real Agriculture, and joining me now, it's Clint Jurke. He's the Regional Technical Services Manager with BASF. Clint, welcome here.
Hey, it's always a pleasure to chat with you, Lyndsey.
Yes, good to see you. All right, now, here we are in full planning mode for 2026. Feels like it gets earlier every year. Today's topic we really want to tackle is clubroot, an incredibly important disease to consider in canola production. Where are we at as far as how this disease has evolved, and how does that inform what decisions producers may need to make for 2026?
Yeah, clubroot is one of the big four diseases that we're concerned about when it comes to canola production, and I would say like 5 years ago, clubroot was the big existential threat to the industry. But, like after 4 or 5 years of it being fairly dry through the western parts of the prairies, clubroot has kind of fallen down on the radar a little bit. It doesn't mean that it's no longer an important disease, but we just haven't seen as much of it. It hasn't been as dramatic. There are certainly some fields that have had quite a bit of disease and yield loss, but it doesn't appear to be the dramatic spread that we were seeing 5+ years ago. So that being said, I'm cautiously saying that we might be a little bit ahead of it right now. Like the dry cycle that we're in, the fact that almost every grower is using clubroot resistance now has been an effective way to keep the disease down.
Now, I mean, that's good news on the side of disease control, maybe not so good news on the side of yield when we're into a dry cycle. But it does give us, as you say, sort of an opportunity to get out in front, potentially, of this disease. We have, through lines of hybrids, we have resistance to clubroot. We have first generation and we have second generation. Can you explain those terms and why a producer may choose one over the other? And especially, I'm going to ask, is second generation just automatically better?
Yeah, great question. So first generation resistance is the resistance that came out of winter canola. It was the first resistance that all seed companies were incorporating into their canola 15 years ago. And it's proved to be very effective. Second generation resistance is basically anything that came after those initial genes that came out of there's a variety called Mendel. It's a winter canola in Europe. So it's the second generation resistance is a pretty big term. It could have some first generation resistance stacked with other genes, or it could be just other genes. And so it's not very specific, but it does help us understand, is this something new? What you had asked earlier, which is second generation resistance automatically better? And the answer to that is it's complicated.
It depends.
And that's the problem with this disease and many diseases, is that they are complicated organisms. And so unfortunately we kind of need complicated solutions. With clubroot, the pathotypes, so the variations in the pathogen, the pathotypes that we were first dealing with 20 years ago, they're controlled by a first generation resistance. But those pathotypes are really widespread. Like we find them all the way from Peace River into Quebec. And the major pathotype there is called 3H. First generation resistance controls that. And it's the most widespread geographically pathotype. Like Saskatchewan, as an example, it's half the canola acres. Their 3H is the main pathotype. We have not seen first generation resistance fail or the pathogen overcoming first generation resistance in Saskatchewan and most of Manitoba, and in fact most of Alberta. So it's first generation resistance does work, and it's a very effective. It's when you have these new pathotypes that have evolved in the fields that are overcoming that first generation resistance is where, now you need to choose a second generation that's actually going to work. So that's the tricky bit.
Mm-hmm. Now, in that conversation, or like we have with any conversation around resistance or, a disease overcoming certain genetic resistance, et cetera, that always brings up the question of, how do we manage for, using these resistant hybrids? How can we keep them effective as long as possible? What other management tips sort of work into this conversation?
Yeah. So you're asking about integrated pest management, and it's a necessary tool for controlling any pest, whether it's a disease or an insect or weeds. The more tools that you can apply to controlling that pest is going to be better. Clubbert is definitely that. Like we do. And this is the reason why we saw first generation resistance. It was overcome relatively quickly in areas north of Edmonton, was because we were relying so heavily on that first generation resistance and nothing else in which to control the disease. We need to apply as many tools to manage it as possible. That will ensure the longevity of that first generation resistance. Like, first generation resistance works fantastic throughout Saskatchewan. We really don't want to see that change. And so what are the other tools for managing? You need to have a longer rotation. So that means a 2-year break from canola. But that also means that you can't grow any other hosts during that break. So any of the brassica weeds, volunteer canola, if you're not managing those, then you're growing essentially canola in a tight rotation. And patch management is a great, like if you find that it's only in one spot, grass that area in and prevent as much of that soil movement. Anything that we can do to reduce the spore load, so resistance, rotations, patch management, that's going to be a great tool when the disease is already established in your field. But you also want to prevent it from arriving in the field, and so that's where sanitation and minimum till, zero till operations are essential for managing the disease. So you need to do everything. And then that's what's going to provide the best benefit for ensuring that resistance lasts and we don't lose yield.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. InVigor now offers what BASF calls the most complete hybrid lineup. It's an expanded list of hybrids. How does this work into this integrated plan and help growers choose the right hybrids for their farm?
Yeah, so the InVigor brand, we have 12 or so different hybrids that are available that range in different types of maturity, different disease like black leg verticillium packages, but they all do possess great pod shatter, pod drop resistance, lodging, harvestability, ease, and couple that with high-end yields. So whether you're choosing a first generation resistance or second generation resistance, like you get that full package of those InVigor genetics that's going to give you a much better opportunity for improved profitability at the end of the season. So it's that full suite of traits that are available for producers with whichever type of club resistance that they're looking for.
Wonderful. All right. Clint, thank you so much for joining me on the show. We're going to take a quick break on RealAg on the weekend, and we'll be back with more right after this.
Black Earth offers a full suite of humic solutions, from high-purity granules to powder, liquid, and soluble formulations, all powered by pure Humulite. Trusted by growers worldwide from one of the world's rarest Humulite reserves. Grow stronger with the power of Black Earth Humulite. Learn more from Mind to Market by visiting blackearth.com.
I'm Lyndsey Smith, host of The Agronomist, and I want to thank you for tuning in for over 200 episodes of our beloved little program. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube for our live and interactive agronomy Q&A. Each week, our guest panel will handle some of your toughest agronomic questions live, streaming on YouTube, Facebook, X, and RealAgriculture.com. Tune in Monday nights or go to RealAgriculture.com/agronomist and sign up for our email notifications and don't miss an episode.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
Welcome back to RealAg on the Weekend. We go now to part of a conversation that my colleague Calvin Hepner had with Keith Currie and Ron Lemaire. They are both just returned from Mexico and significant meetings with their Mexican counterparts. Both Keith and Ron share some of their insights into not just what was discussed at these meetings last week, but also what the potential is for Canadian product moving to Mexico.
We're pleased to welcome Keith Currie, President of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and Ron Lemaire, President of the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time to join us. Any big takeaways from the trip to Mexico, or maybe take us through your itinerary, some of the meetings that took place? I know there were a series of meetings that lined up with this trip to a couple different cities in Mexico.
When you look at the work that CFA and CPMA and others have been doing over many years, we're really seeing an appetite in 2025 and really being driven, I think, specifically by the U.S. administration to look at how do we continue to work with our partners directly south of us, but then how do we expand diversity of trade with the Mexico market, which has, I think, been underutilized on a bilateral approach, which is really interesting to see. So even prior to the Prime Minister visiting Mexico to meet the President, CPMA and CFA were engaged with the embassy and beginning to lay the groundwork. So there's been a lot of direct engagement with our counterparts in Mexico. And at the same time, I think the listeners should be aware, like the work CFA has been doing and the work CPMA has been doing and others to ensure agriculture was even in the release by the Prime Minister. So sometimes we forget, we see ourselves in agriculture as a driving economic engine in Canada. We are a rural force. We feed the country. We feed the world. But in the last 9 months, all we've been hearing is automotive, aluminum, forestry. And those are significant sectors, but we need to ensure agriculture is not put in the background. And a big part of the discussion around the tables was exactly that, right? How do we do the work that we were doing even before the Prime Minister and President began speaking and continue to push that forward through the existing mechanisms we have? But at the same time, how do we start expanding those mechanisms and look at driving trade? And the trade opportunities could be significant if we look at creatively how we expand, whether it's AI, whether it's technology, whether it's commodities. The base we always go back to is let's look at commodity trade. But at the end of the day, we have so much more in Canadian agriculture to push, towards Mexico.
Both countries in the press release, the readout that came out from both governments, agreed to several commitments around cutting red tape, regulatory recognition, some of it on the testing, the laboratory side of things. I know there was some mention of easing import requirements for apples from Eastern Canada, Ron. Also electronic certification for some plant products, including canola and wheat. When you look at that list of accomplishments coming out of this trip, I know some of this, what you're talking about is longer term and bigger picture, but in terms of specifics out of the meetings that took place last week, what tops the list in terms of those accomplishments? Keith, how about you from your perspective?
So certainly for CFA, it's a much broader picture because we represent really all of agriculture. So, picking and choosing winners isn't something that we can do because we think they're all winners. But we certainly focusing on, in the early days, the low-hanging fruit. What are products that we can move quickly into a country like Mexico? And I think it all starts with a plan off the top, and part of that plan was a real commitment by both sides to reinforce that commitment to an integrated supply chain. I think that's key to be able to move products, is that supply chain has to be functioning, it has to be in place, and has to be smooth running. And that, how do we make that cross-border action happen quicker? Digitalization was talked about a lot, AI and digitalization, on how we can make things easier at the border, especially for commodities that Ron represents that are perishable, have a limited shelf life. We need to get them across the border quickly. But really, it's looking, as I mentioned, low-hanging fruit. We know that they have a growing milling business in Mexico, so they're looking at some of our cereals that they can bring in to increase their pastry production in Mexico. There was a significant meat presence at these meetings. Minister McDonald made an announcement on the Wednesday about Costco. I think there was 28 Costco stores in Mexico that were now going to be selling Canadian beef. The Pork Council was very excited about the opportunities for pork into Mexico as well. And so there's just a lot of opportunities. The canola industry in Mexico was very much looking forward to increasing their import of Canadian canola and canola oil. So there's some immediate products that we can be working on quickly. And I think one of the good aspects of these discussions not only was to continue in them, but to make them more formal. Instead of meeting once a year, let's meet on for example, a quarterly basis. But in the meantime, they've been meeting with their counterparts in Mexico for years. We just need all of our sectors to start meeting with the same sectors in Mexico, and have those discussions ahead of those, say, quarterly meetings, so that we can really speed up and ramp up the process of getting trade across the border between the two countries.
You know what's interesting, and that we saw coming out of the meetings, is the proactive views the Mexican industry is beginning to take relative to how we develop trade, and the voice they're having, not about only having a protectionist approach on their markets, but how do we actually enable, and how they enable their governments. And we really saw that, when the president and prime minister met, industry from both sides were already positioning their associations to be able to voice the right message. And when we sat down with the minister and secretary, what was really interesting is the Mexican industry from the produce side, but as well as others, having a clear discussion and wanting to talk about how do we utilize the port system in Mexico more effectively. Keith noted supply chains and the importance of movement of product. The strategy around better utilization of the Montreal, Halifax, and Vancouver ports, and the potential for expansion into Mexican ports is very interesting to see, not only rail and truck, but providing that other vehicle. In the event there's a supply chain disruption, you're not left with only one tool in the toolbox. So these are all pieces that I think are vital to begin driving forward on, and we already have beginnings of a clear strategy in Canada on how we develop our infrastructure. And I think looking at how that links in a North American context is essential as we move forward with CUSMA.
All right, we're going to leave it there. A fascinating conversation with Ron and Keith and Kelvin. I highly recommend, if you've got your phone with you or when you sit down at your desk next, head on over to RealAgriculture.com. You can actually find that entire interview, because it's much longer than just the 8 or 9 minutes I've been able to snip here. Some really fantastic insight into what happens at these conversations down in these other countries that we're trading with. And obviously the Mexico-Canada relationship is just so incredibly vital as part of CUSMA or the USMCA, but also outside of CUSMA and the USMCA, in that realistically we do have our largest trading partner in between the two of us. But it's really important, I think, that we recognize that there can be more that Mexico and Canada do together. Maybe that doesn't necessarily have to involve the U.S. And that was definitely one of the topics of conversation. All right, we've got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me here on Real Ag on the weekend. Have a wonderful weekend. Cheers, everybody.